My name is Charlotte Hale. I'm 38 years old, and I used to believe I understood the meaning of family, what it meant to be loyal, to show up to forgive without question. But that was 8 years ago, before I learned how betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it's the person who shares your blood who holds the sharpest knife. Today, I live in Chicago and work as the vice president of marketing for a leading tech agency. My life on the surface is everything I once hoped for: spacious corner apartment overlooking the river, a career built from scratch, a quiet, steady kind of happiness that took years to rebuild. But behind all that is a scar that never fully faded, a silence that settled between me and the people I once called family. Growing up in Austin, Texas, my childhood wasn't tragic. It was textbook suburban. Two-story house, golden retriever, backyard barbecues on Sundays. Our mother Eleanor was the heart of that world, a public school teacher who made every packed lunch a small act of love, who believed in handwritten notes and homemade birthday cakes, even when we were too old to ask for them. She was calm, diplomatic, endlessly patient, especially with the two of us, me and my younger sister Vanessa. Vanessa and I were close once. We're only 2 years apart, but personality-wise, we might as well have been born on different planets. I was the classic overachiever, color-coded notebook, student council, early admission to Northwestern. Vanessa was the magnetic one, the type of girl who could charm a room with nothing more than a smirk and a sideways glance. Where I followed rules, she bent them. Where I sought approval, she assumed she already had it. Despite that, I adored her. I protected her, covered for her teenage missteps, even helped her get out of credit card debt in her 20s when she didn't want our parents to know. I thought that's what big sisters did. I thought our bond, tested and tangled though it was, could survive anything. I was wrong. 8 years ago, everything I thought I knew about love, family, and loyalty collapsed in a single moment. A moment I still don't talk about out loud. One that replays itself when I least expect it, standing in a grocery store aisle, hearing a certain song on the radio, watching sisters laugh together like nothing could touch them. I hadn't seen Vanessa since the day it all fell apart. No phone calls, no texts, just distance, deliberate and heavy. She stayed in Austin. I left. The wound became a wall, and I buried myself in rebuilding what was left of me. And then came the phone call that shattered the quiet life I'd carefully pieced together. It was a Thursday afternoon when I got the news Mom was gone. Pancreatic cancer. Fast. Brutal. She never told me how bad it had gotten. Typical Mom, always shielding us from the worst. Even in the end, she worried more about how we'd cope than about herself. The funeral was set for the following week in Austin. I booked a flight that night, packed a bag in silence, and stared out my bedroom window, wondering if going back meant reopening wounds I had no intention of touching again. But I'd promised her once years ago that no matter what I would try to forgive. I just never imagined she'd make me keep that promise after she was gone. And I never imagined who would be waiting for me when I did. 8 years ago, I was 30 and thought I had it all figured out. I had just landed my promotion to marketing director at a mid-sized firm in Boston, was living in a brownstone near Beacon Hill, and most importantly, I was in love. The kind of love that makes you see the world in softer colors, that makes the future feel like a sure thing. His name was Brandon Kemp, a tech entrepreneur with a magnetic smile, crisp suits, and the kind of confidence that filled any room he walked into. We met at a charity fundraiser hosted by a mutual friend. He asked me what my favorite marketing campaign of all time was. I answered honestly. He smiled like he already knew it would be the same as his. That's how it started. Brandon wasn't just charming, he was strategic, successful, and always 10 steps ahead in business and in life. Within a year, we were engaged. The proposal was cinematic, a private dinner on a rooftop, city lights glowing behind us, a 5-carat diamond ring in a velvet box. I said yes through tears. Of joy back then. My parents were thrilled, especially Mom. She loved planning and she dove into wedding preparations like it was her full-time job. My dad, Thomas, was quieter about it, but I could tell he approved of Brandon, said he had the look of a man going somewhere. I didn't disagree. Vanessa, on the other hand, was complicated. She had always been the kind of sister who turned heads. Even at family gatherings, she had a way of drawing attention to herself. Laughter just a little louder. Dresses just a little tighter, stories just a little more dramatic than they needed to be. I chalked it up to her being the free spirit, the artist of the family. She worked part-time at a gallery in Austin and said things like, "Structure kills creativity," anytime someone asked when she was getting her life together. But I loved her. And more importantly, Mom wanted us close. So when it came time to choose a maid of honor, I picked Vanessa. Mom beamed. "This will bring you girls even closer," she said. I wanted to believe her. The first time Vanessa met Brandon was at our parents' house during the holidays. She floated in late, wrapped in an oversized scarf and perfume so strong it lingered after she left a room. She hugged Brandon a little too long, complimented his shoes, his watch, his laugh. I laughed it off. That's just Vanessa, I told myself. Flirty by nature, always has been. But something lingered like the perfume, something I couldn't name yet. The wedding planning moved forward. Vanessa offered to help with the guest list, the flower arrangements, even taste test cakes on my behalf when work kept me late at the office. "Just want everything to be perfect for you," she said. I thanked her. She smiled. But sometimes I'd catch her watching Brandon, not in the casual, familiar way, something else. A hunger she tried to hide behind carefully rehearsed cheerfulness. One night after dinner, my mom pulled me aside in the kitchen while Vanessa and Brandon laughed in the living room. "She's quite taken with him," Mom said, gently placing leftovers into containers. I rolled my eyes. "She's just being friendly, Mom." Maybe she replied, "But be careful, honey. You know how your sister can get when you have something she admires." I kissed her cheek and told her not to worry. And I believed that, back then. Planning a wedding while juggling 60-hour work weeks wasn't easy, but I managed. I always did. Spreadsheets, checklists, budget trackers. I approached it like a campaign launch. Every flower order and vendor meeting was a task to conquer. And Brandon, for a while, seemed on board. But something started to shift. It wasn't sudden. That's the thing about unraveling. It doesn't snap, it frays. Little threads pull loose one at a time until you look down and realize you're holding nothing but the pieces. Brandon stopped showing up for things he once cared about. He bailed on our engagement photo shoot with less than an hour's notice, some emergency investor call. He forgot the cake tasting altogether. When I reminded him gently, he shrugged. "You have great taste. Just pick what you like." That should have been sweet. Supportive, even. But his voice was flat, like the words were just placeholders. At night, he worked late. Or so he said. His phone was always within reach, screen tilted away. I'd catch glimpses of texts, just names, never conversations. When I asked if everything was okay, he'd kiss my forehead and say, "Just tired, babe." But I was tired too. Tired of pretending not to notice the way he no longer laughed at my jokes. Tired of brushing aside how often he corrected me in public or made subtle digs about my clothes, my tone, even the way I chewed my food. "This dress again," he said one evening as I slipped on the navy silk wrap I'd worn for our first date. "It kind of washes you out under this lighting." It was the same dress he once called breathtaking. I said nothing. I just nodded and changed. Vanessa, on the other hand, seemed to be popping up everywhere. She called often, more than she ever had before. "Just checking in," she'd say. Or, "Need help with anything, sis?" She offered to meet with the florist, insisted she and Brandon had such similar taste. It would make things easier. She even began texting Brandon directly for coordination. I didn't question it at first. We were all adults. Family. What could go wrong? My mother noticed the difference before I did. "You seem off," she said one Sunday while we were folding party favors together in the dining room. "Just tired," I replied. She gave me that look, the one only mothers have, the one that sees through every deflection. "You know you don't have to carry this alone," she said, touching my hand. "Planning a wedding shouldn't feel like surviving a war." I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. Something was breaking, not just between me and Brandon, but inside me. The certainty I used to carry was slipping away. I started waking in the middle of the night with a tightness in my chest. Not panic exactly, just dread. I began double-checking things I used to trust his calendar, his stories, his tone. Everything felt off kilter. And still I said nothing. Because saying something would make it real. And I wasn't ready for real. I just wanted to marry the man I loved, stand beside my sister in matching dresses, and believe, like I had since we were kids, that in the end, love and family were enough. But deep down, I already knew. Something was coming, something I couldn't spreadsheet or schedule or fix. If I had to pick the moment things shifted from uncomfortable to undeniable, it was the cake tasting. Brandon and I had spent weeks narrowing down bakeries. He'd circled one on the list, Linden and Rye, saying their espresso truffle cake was life-changing. We had the appointment on the calendar for a month. He even joked about skipping breakfast that day to make room. But that morning he called me. Something came up. Meeting with a potential investor. "Can Vanessa go with you?" I blinked at the phone in disbelief. Vanessa? Why would she? "She knows what I like," he said. And she offered. That was the part that stung. She offered, volunteered. I went because rescheduling wasn't an option. Vanessa showed up in a white linen dress, sunglasses perched on her head like a crown, and greeted the bakery staff like they were old friends. "She'll take the pistachio mousse," she told the server, flashing a grin. He hates anything too sweet. I sat there in silence, wondering how she knew his taste better than I did. I'd lived with Brandon for over a year, but in that moment, I felt like the outsider. Vanessa joked easily, sampled eagerly, and even texted Brandon mid-tasting for his official vote. He responded in seconds. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, mind, replaying the afternoon over and over. The laughter, the way she leaned in when she talked about him, the photo she took of a cake sample and sent to him with the caption, "Your favorite." Was I imagining this? I didn't want to become the woman who doubted her own sister, who questioned glances, who tracked text responses like a jealous teenager. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was slowly being replaced. Not all at once, just piece by piece, like someone rearranging a room while you're asleep. The next morning, while doing laundry, I found something that made the knot in my stomach tighten. A silver earring, long, dangly, with a tiny sapphire set at the end. It was Vanessa's. I remembered them from our engagement party, Grandma Hale's gift to her on her 18th birthday. Unique, unmistakable. It had been wedged between the passenger seat and center console of Brandon's car. I was vacuuming crumbs from our weekend road trip, trying to keep busy, trying not to spiral. But the moment I saw it, time slowed. I picked it up with shaking fingers. I stared at it like it might change into something else, something harmless. That evening I showed it to Brandon. He didn't even flinch. "Oh yeah," he said casually. "I gave her a ride to the florist last week. She must have dropped it." "The florist?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He nodded. Her car was in the shop. It wasn't a big deal. I called Vanessa right after. "Oh, thank God," she said, laughing lightly. "I've been looking everywhere for that earring. I thought I lost it at the gallery." "The florist," I repeated. "Yeah, he was nice enough to take me," she said breezily. "I didn't think you'd mind." The stories matched. Too perfectly. My pulse was thudding in my ears. I ended the call as politely as I could, then sat on the edge of my bed with the earring in my hand and dread pooling in my chest. They were lying. Not just once. Not a slip of the tongue. It was coordinated, practiced, and I didn't know what hurt more, that they were doing it, or that they thought I was too naive to notice. After the earring incident, everything shifted. On the surface, nothing changed. Brandon still kissed me on the cheek before heading to work. Vanessa still texted cheerful updates about centerpiece samples and bridesmaid dresses. But beneath all of it, I felt like I was living in a house of mirrors, distorted reflections, and no solid ground. The next few weeks were a blur of suspicion and second-guessing. I started checking Brandon's phone when he left it on the kitchen counter, a sick feeling in my stomach every time. I never found anything explicit, just messages from Vanessa that were overly familiar. One read, "Don't forget, the tasting is tomorrow, I'll make sure it's not too chocolatey," followed by a winking emoji. I tried telling myself it was harmless, that my mind was just playing tricks on me, fueled by stress and fatigue. But deep down, I knew better. My body knew better too. I stopped sleeping through the night. I lost weight without trying, 5 pounds, then 10. My once clear skin dulled and dark circles etched themselves beneath my eyes like bruises I hadn't earned. At work, my focus slipped. I missed deadlines. My team started double-checking my presentations. I couldn't blame them. I didn't recognize myself either. I began seeing a therapist in secret. Her name was Dr. Abrams. Soft voice, firm boundaries. She listened as I unraveled, gently pulling at threads I had tried so hard to hold together. "Have you confronted either of them directly?" she asked during one session. "I tried," I said, "but they match each other's stories too perfectly. It's like watching two actors read from the same script." She nodded. "And how does that make you feel?" "Paranoid," I said, laughing bitterly. "Crazy. Like I'm the villain in my own love story." Or maybe, she replied, "You're the only one still trying to tell the truth." That night, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, brushing my hair back from my face. I looked older than I remembered, worn down by 1,000 little heartbreaks no one else could see. 3 weeks before the wedding, Brandon came home late again. He found me sitting on the couch in my robe lights dimmed, untouched dinner on the table. "Hey," he said, dropping his keys on the counter. "Sorry, things ran over." "Who were you with?" I asked, keeping my voice even. He blinked. "What?" "Tonight." "Who were you with?" "Investors," he said instantly. Too instantly. "We were reviewing terms on the Series B round." "Look, I can show you emails if I don't need proof," I interrupted. "I need honesty." He stared at me, expression unreadable. For a moment, I thought he might tell me, that he'd finally say the words out loud, that I wasn't crazy, that what I felt was real. But he just walked past me. "I'm going to shower," he said. The water ran for 20 minutes. That night I lay in bed pretending to sleep, listening to Brandon in the guest room. His voice was low, almost a whisper. "Not now. She'll hear us. I know. Soon, I promise." I froze. He was on the phone, and it wasn't with an investor. I didn't confront him. I couldn't. Not yet. My fear outweighed my anger, my heartbreak dulled by the numbness that follows too many broken expectations. The next morning, I called my mom. She heard the tension in my voice before I said a word. "Sweetheart, talk to me," she said softly. "I think he's cheating on me," I whispered. There was a long silence. "Do you want me to come?" she finally asked. "No," I said, tears burning behind my eyes. I just needed to say it out loud. Because once I said it, I couldn't take it back. After that call with my mom, something inside me cracked, but it didn't collapse. Instead, it twisted. I doubled down. I convinced myself that I could fight for this. That maybe the problem was me, that I'd been too distracted with work, too busy with planning, too focused on perfection to see what Brandon really needed. So I shifted gears. I booked a spa day for the two of us. I left handwritten notes in his briefcase like I used to when we first moved in together. I ordered new lingerie. I cooked his favorite meals, from scratch salmon with lemon butter risotto with white wine, even that complicated creme brulee he loved, but never expected me to make. He barely touched his plate. "This is nice," he mumbled one evening, barely looking up from his phone. "Thanks." That was it. No compliment. No kiss. Just a passing glance like I was a waitress who got his order right. I told myself he was tired. I told myself everything was temporary. Then came the final straw, or what should have been. We were scheduled to visit the venue to finalize the seating chart, followed by a meeting with the DJ. Brandon was excited about it. He'd spent hours putting together the playlist, said music was the soul of the night. That morning, he left a voicemail. Something came up. Again. But this time, he didn't suggest I go alone. He said Vanessa can join you. She knows what I like. I dropped the phone. How did my sister know more about my fiancé's preferences than I did? Still like a fool. I agreed. I stood in that venue, an old converted mansion with high ceilings and sprawling oak trees, and watched Vanessa glide through it like she was already the bride. She walked ahead of me, talking to the planner, adjusting floral arrangements, asking if the lighting could catch the crystal centerpieces just right. She spoke with authority, with confidence, like she belonged there more than I did. That night, I offered to clean Brandon's car before a dinner party we were hosting for his colleagues. I needed something to do with my hands, some small task, to feel useful, to feel in control. That's when I found the second earring. Not a twin to the one I had discovered weeks earlier. The same one. The exact same earring Vanessa had been looking everywhere for. Which meant she had never taken it back. She had never even asked for it. It had been there the whole time, hiding, like the truth. I held it in my hand and stared at it for a long time. The sunlight caught the sapphire and sent fractured blue light across the dashboard. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stopped. I walked inside, placed the earring on Brandon's nightstand, and said nothing. When he came home, I watched him notice it. His fingers brushed over it for barely a second before he picked it up and slipped it into his pocket. No explanation. No apology. Nothing. He poured himself a drink and turned on the news, as if this was normal, as if I didn't just hold the physical proof of everything falling apart. That night, I stared at the ceiling and thought about how much I had given my time, my love, my trust, and how little of it was ever enough. I wanted to scream, to pack my bags, to disappear. But I didn't, not yet, because a part of me still held on to hope, even as the rest of me was preparing for war. 3 weeks before the wedding, Brandon told me we should consider postponing. He didn't frame it like a breakup. No, that would have required honesty. Instead, he said he was worried about me, that I seemed tired, that maybe I was overwhelmed, that I wasn't myself lately. He looked at me with eyes that were practiced concerned, but hollow, like a doctor gently breaking bad news he'd rehearsed a dozen times. "I just think we might be rushing this," he said over coffee one morning, avoiding my gaze. "Maybe we need a little space to breathe before the big day." I stared at him across the kitchen island, heart pounding. "So this isn't about anything else?" He reached out and placed his hand over mine. "Of course not. You're the love of my life." That was the cruelest part. He said it so calmly, so smoothly, that I almost believed him. Almost. But the poison was already inside me by then, and my instincts, the ones I had silenced for months, were screaming. That night I couldn't sleep. Around 3 a.m., I rolled over and reached for Brandon, only to find his side of the bed empty. The sheets were still warm. From down the hall, I heard muffled whispers coming from the guest bedroom. At first I thought he might be on a call. His job occasionally involved late-night international meetings. But then I heard it, his voice low and tense. "Not now. She'll hear us. I know. Soon, I promise." I didn't move. I just stared at the ceiling, my hands balled into fists beneath the covers. He was talking to her. I knew it. The next morning, I made a decision. I packed his favorite sandwich from the deli across from my office, bought 2 coffees, and drove to his building downtown. It was a Tuesday. Nothing unusual. Brandon had meetings scheduled all day. His assistant, Margot, would be at her desk. I told myself I was doing a kind gesture, that I needed a glimpse of normalcy, but really I needed to know. When I arrived, Margot looked startled. "Charlotte," she said, standing up abruptly. "We weren't expecting you." I smiled politely. "That's the point of a surprise." Her eyes darted toward Brandon's office door, which was closed. "He's, in a meeting." "That's okay," I said, lifting the lunch bag. "I'll just drop this off." She stepped in front of me. "Actually, he asked not to be disturbed this morning." Something in her voice made my stomach turn. "Is he alone in there?" I asked. Her pause was all the answer I needed. I didn't wait for permission. I walked past her, opened the office door, and the world fell out from under me. There they were. Brandon and Vanessa, my fiancé, my sister. Her arms were wrapped around his neck. His hands gripped her waist. Their lips were locked in a kiss so familiar, so practiced that it made me nauseous. They didn't even hear me at first. I had a solid 5 seconds to take it all in. Her blouse, wrinkled his tie, loosened the intimacy in their body language, undeniable. When the door clicked shut behind me, they finally turned. 3 pairs of eyes locked across the room. 3 expressions froze in place. Brandon recovered first. "Charlotte," he said, straightening his tie like we were in a boardroom. "This isn't what it looks like." Vanessa didn't even bother lying. She just lifted her chin and said, "We didn't plan this. It just happened." The sandwich bag slipped from my fingers and hit the carpet with a dull thud. The only thing louder than the silence was my heartbeat. I wasn't even angry yet. I was hollow. And the worst part? A small voice inside me whispered, "You already knew. You just didn't want to face it." I don't remember walking into the room. I don't remember how the door closed behind me or how I moved across the carpet. I only remember the feeling like being underwater, everything muffled pressure, building behind my eyes, breath hard to catch. Charlotte Brandon said again, this time softer hands raised slightly, like I was some wounded animal that might lash out. I didn't respond. I looked at Vanessa. She stood beside him, expression tight but unrepentant. Her lipstick smudged slightly, hair tousled in a way that no amount of product could fake. "We didn't plan this," she repeated. "It just happened." I blinked slowly. "How long?" Brandon stepped forward. "Let's not do this here." "How long?" I said again, louder this time. He glanced at Vanessa, then back at me. "A few months. A few months." That was nearly half our engagement. While I was booking venues, choosing flowers, writing vows, they were sneaking around whispering in dark rooms, stealing what I had spent years building. Since the engagement party, Vanessa added, not even blinking. That was 8 months ago. 8 months. I let out a breath that felt like it had been sitting in my lungs for days. While I was introducing him to Grandma, you were introducing yourself in a whole different way. Brandon sighed like I was being unreasonable. Look, this was never the plan. We tried to fight it. Don't say that I snapped. Don't give me that lazy, scripted excuse. You didn't try to fight anything. You made choices. You looked me in the eye for months, both of you knowing exactly what you were doing. Vanessa's jaw clenched. It's not like I wanted this to happen. You mean it wasn't convenient until it was I shot back? Brandon moved behind his desk, suddenly all business. Charlotte, I think it's best if we have this conversation later. Emotions are high. You think this is emotional for me? I said, voice trembling. No. Emotional would have been if I caught you once cried and begged for an explanation. This, I gestured between them. This is surgical. This is what months of lies and manipulation looks like. He reached for the intercom. Margot, can you come in? Moments later, his assistant appeared, eyes wide, clearly unsure of what she was walking into. Please escort Charlotte out, Brandon said. She's upset. I stared at him, stunned. You cheat on me, with my sister, in your office. And now you're having me removed like some disruptive client I'm escorting myself out, I said quietly. I turned to Vanessa. You always wanted what I had, I whispered. Toys, clothes, friends. But this, you didn't just take something from me. You destroyed a family. Something flickered in her expression. Guilt. No, just discomfort. You deserve each other, I said, stepping out into the hallway. Behind me, the door clicked shut. The walk to the elevator felt like a tunnel. I passed Margot, who didn't meet my eyes. I pressed the button with a trembling hand and waited. Inside the elevator, the silence was deafening. And then came the tears. Big, hot, silent sobs that I couldn't hold back anymore. I pressed my forehead against the cool metal wall and let it all out. The betrayal, the humiliation, the knowing deep down that I'd felt this coming and still tried to outrun it. I drove home in a haze, the city a blur through streaked windows. By the time I reached my apartment, I could barely breathe. I locked the door behind me, slid down the wall, and curled into myself on the hardwood floor. For the first time in my adult life, I didn't feel strong. I didn't feel in control. I just felt broken and utterly, devastatingly alone. 2 days passed before I could even think clearly. I stayed inside my apartment curtains, drawn phone off food, untouched. My mother called 8 times, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. I didn't want to hear the sympathy in her voice. Or worse, her disappointment. As if part of her had known too. On the 3rd day, I forced myself out of bed, not because I felt better, but because I couldn't afford not to. I still had a job, a title, a career I'd built from the ground up. I clung to that like a lifeline, the last piece of myself not tied to Brandon or Vanessa. When I walked into the office, I expected whispers. I expected pity. I got neither. Instead, my manager called me into a conference room before I could even put my purse down. We need to talk about your performance. That phrase, so sterile, so corporate, sent a chill through me. Apparently, concerns had been raised about my emotional instability, about inappropriate conduct during work hours, about unprofessional interactions with an executive partner. I blinked at her, stunned. What executive partner? She slid a file across the table. Brandon Kemp. It felt like my lungs collapsed. He'd submitted a formal complaint 2 weeks ago, before I found out about the affair. I opened the file with trembling hands. There it was in black and white. Allegations that I had blurred personal and professional boundaries, made repeated unscheduled appearances at his office, and compromised his working relationship with our agency. It read like a legal strategy, a preemptive defense, a setup. He hadn't just betrayed me personally, he had laid the groundwork to discredit me professionally. So when I walked into that office and caught them together, I wasn't just the wronged fiancé. I was the unstable woman he'd already warned everyone about. My manager looked sympathetic but firm. We're not terminating you, but we're recommending a leave of absence effective immediately. For your well-being, Charlotte. For my well-being. The room spun. I stood numb, clutching the file. Back at my desk, my inbox was flooded with forwarded emails, project handoffs, transition plans. My name was already being scrubbed from the work I'd poured myself into for years. I left the office in a daze. I sat in my car in the parking garage for nearly an hour, just staring at the steering wheel. Brandon had taken everything. Not just my heart, not just my trust. He had dismantled my life with surgical precision, preparing for fallout before it even happened. Like I was a liability to manage, a threat to contain. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Vanessa. I know this looks bad, but it wasn't meant to hurt you. I hope someday you'll understand. Understand? I nearly laughed. She didn't even have the courage to call. Instead, she sent me a message that read like a note on a cocktail napkin, something hollow and performative, just enough to clear her conscience without taking any real responsibility. I didn't reply. I couldn't. I drove to my parents' house instead. My mother opened the door before I even rang the bell. She must have seen me through the window. She didn't say anything. She just wrapped me in her arms. And I broke. Right there on the front steps. I told her everything. From the late nights and text messages to the kiss and the earring and the HR report. Her face grew tighter with every word. My father paced in the living room behind us, red-faced, muttering to himself. "I'll kill him," he said under his breath. "I swear to God, Thomas, your blood pressure," Mom warned, but her voice trembled too. That night they made up the guest room for me. I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, one question repeating in my mind. What do you do when the people who promise to protect you are the ones who burn it all down? I didn't know yet. But I was starting to realize I couldn't stay here anymore. Not in this city. Not in this life. Not as the version of me they tried to destroy. I spent the next 3 days at my parents' house in Austin, moving through the world like a ghost. My mother hovered close but didn't push. She made my favorite soup, folded my laundry when I couldn't, and left hot tea by my door every morning. My father barely spoke. His anger simmered just beneath the surface, quiet but volcanic. He didn't say Vanessa's name once. I think if he had, he wouldn't have been able to stop himself. Vanessa never reached out again, not to apologize, not to explain. She disappeared into silence like she had disappeared into Brandon's arms, and maybe that was for the best. One afternoon, I found myself in the backyard sitting on the old swing set where Vanessa and I used to play. The chains were rusted, the seat sun-bleached, but it held my weight like it always had. I closed my eyes and tried to picture the version of myself from a year ago, confident, focused, hopeful. I couldn't find her, but I could feel someone new taking shape in the emptiness she left behind. I wasn't sure who that woman was yet, but I knew she couldn't stay here. Boston was haunted. Every block, every bakery, every corner of my apartment echoed with memories of a life that no longer existed. If I stayed, I would drown in it. I needed distance, a reset, a place where I wasn't the girl whose sister stole her fiancé or the VP on an unexpected leave of absence. I needed to be Charlotte, just Charlotte. So when I saw the internal job posting for a senior marketing director in our Chicago office, I didn't hesitate. I applied that night. 2 weeks later, I packed up my apartment and left Brandon's engagement ring with the doorman at his building wrapped in tissue and silence. I never saw him again. I didn't say goodbye to Vanessa either, and I didn't look back. Because some bridges aren't meant to be burned. They're meant to collapse, so you're forced to build something stronger on the other side. Chicago in early fall felt colder than I expected, not just in temperature, but in spirit. The wind off the river bit through my coat and left my cheeks raw. The apartment I moved into was small, barely furnished walls, empty corners echoing. But it was mine, a place where no one had ever said, "We didn't plan this, it just happened." I arrived with 2 suitcases, a box of books, and the kind of emotional exhaustion that doesn't show up on your face but weighs down your bones. The first few weeks I threw myself into work. The Chicago office had heard whispers, of course. Corporate gossip travels faster than logic. But no one brought it up. They just handed me clients' timelines and expectations. And that was exactly what I needed. Work didn't ask how I was feeling. It didn't stare at me with pity. It didn't tell me I looked tired or suggest a yoga retreat. It simply demanded attention, and in return gave me distance from everything I'd left behind. I arrived early, stayed late, ate dinner at my desk, slept with my laptop on the nightstand. If I wasn't working, I was numbing. Streaming shows I couldn't follow, scrolling social media until my eyes burned, avoiding anything that reminded me of wedding dresses or siblings or men with easy smiles and hidden knives. Vanessa and Brandon didn't reach out. I blocked their numbers before I even crossed the Illinois state line. But I still saw them sometimes, in nightmares, in flashbacks, in the way I hesitated before trusting anyone's smile for too long. Therapy helped. I found a new therapist in Chicago, a woman named Dr. Mills, who didn't try to fix me. She just asked hard questions and let the silence sit between them. She was the first person who told me that betrayal is a kind of grief, that what I was mourning wasn't just a relationship, but an entire imagined future. One session she asked me, "What do you miss the most?" I didn't say Brandon. I said the version of me who believed in happy endings, because that was what hurt the most. Not losing him, but losing her. But slowly, something began to shift. It started with small things. I bought a new lamp for the apartment, a warm amber light that made the space feel less sterile. I started attending a local yoga class, even though I hated group workouts. I joined a book club through the office and met Madison, our HR director, who had an acerbic sense of humor and a soft heart. She invited me for drinks one Friday. "You need people," she said plainly, "not just projects." I wanted to argue, but she was right. So I went. And little by little, I began rebuilding something that resembled a life. Not the one I lost, a new one, a quieter, steadier one. Some nights were still hard. I still had to resist the urge to cyberstalk them, to check if they'd set a wedding date, to hate them out loud in the privacy of my living room. But those urges lost their grip over time. One crisp November afternoon, I walked along the river after work. The city glowed golden wind slicing through bare branches. I paused on a bridge and watched the current below rush past fast and indifferent. And for the first time since the betrayal, I didn't feel like I was drowning. I wasn't healed, but I was upright. I was moving forward. And for now, that was enough. The call came on a gray Thursday afternoon. I was in my office reviewing a product launch proposal when my phone buzzed. It was my father. He rarely called during work hours, and something in my chest tightened before I even answered. "Charlotte," he said, voice low and brittle, "your mom's gone." For a moment I couldn't speak. The words hung in the air, incomprehensible, impossible, like they belonged in someone else's story. "She passed in her sleep last night," he continued, peacefully. Just like she wanted. I closed my eyes. Tears came, but they didn't fall. I had known it was coming. Pancreatic cancer doesn't leave much room for hope, but knowing and feeling are two very different things. I booked the earliest flight to Austin and spent the rest of the night packing in silence. It had been 8 years since I last stepped foot in my parents' home. 8 years since the night I caught Brandon and Vanessa in that office, since I left everything behind, my city, my family, even my name in some ways. Chicago had become my sanctuary, my new life, my second chance, but I owed my mother this, She had begged me for years to reconcile with Vanessa, had pleaded in voicemails and letters that I never answered. I couldn't. I wasn't ready. And now, it was too late. The morning of the funeral was overcast, the Texas sky thick with muted clouds. I stood in my childhood bedroom wearing a black dress that hung looser than I remembered. Grief does that, it empties you from the inside out. Carter stood behind me in the mirror, adjusting his tie. His presence grounded me, calm, steady, strong in the ways I wasn't yet. We'd been married for 2 years now, and he had never once asked me to talk about Vanessa. He didn't need to. He knew what silence between sisters sounded like. "You don't have to go through this alone," he said quietly, placing his hand on my shoulder. I nodded but didn't respond. Downstairs, my father sat at the kitchen table staring into a cup of untouched coffee. He looked 10 years older than the last time I'd seen him in person. Grief had hollowed him. My heart ached just looking at him. "You ready, Dad?" I asked softly, touching his arm. He nodded. Eleanor always said funerals were for the living. Never understood that until now. The funeral home was already filling when we arrived. Extended family, old neighbors, former students of my mother's. I recognized faces I hadn't seen in decades. Everyone offered condolences, soft smiles, lingering hugs, but I barely heard them, because I knew she was coming. Vanessa. I hadn't said her name aloud in years, but I'd known she'd show up. And when the murmurs started quiet, gasps, shifting glances, I turned and saw them. Vanessa dressed in an elegant black sheath, her makeup flawless, her posture perfect. And beside her, Brandon. His hand rested on her lower back, his wedding band catching the light. My breath caught just for a second, not because I still loved him, not because I missed him, but because grief has a cruel way of folding itself over old wounds. They walked toward us, heads high, eyes scanning the room, and I realized I wasn't afraid of her anymore. I wasn't the broken girl on the bathroom floor. Not today. Today I was the woman who survived them both. Vanessa was the first to speak. She stepped forward, offering my father a hug he returned stiffly out of obligation more than warmth. I noticed his jaw clench as her arms wrapped around him, and for a brief moment, I saw the pain ripple through his usually composed demeanor. Then she turned to me. "Charlotte," she said as if we'd seen each other last week and not 8 years ago. Her voice hadn't changed. Smooth, controlled, practiced. "It's been a long time," she added. I looked at her for a beat, taking her in fully. Time had softened some of the edges in her face, but the precision in her presentation remained. Her jewelry was minimal but expensive. Her dress was designer understated but intentional. She wanted to be seen, but not blamed. She wanted to own the room, not the past. "Yes," I replied simply. I didn't offer a hug, not even a handshake. Brandon gave me a half nod. "We're sorry for your loss," he said, his voice lower than I remembered. Carter returned to my side, then placing a comforting hand on the small of my back. His presence sent a clear message I wasn't alone in this room anymore, and I wasn't someone they could shake. Vanessa's gaze flicked between us. "Can I speak to you privately?" she asked, gesturing toward a small anteroom off the main hall. Everything inside me screamed, no. But this wasn't the time or place for a public scene. 5 minutes, I said. The room she led me into was empty quiet, furnished with a few armchairs and a box of tissues on the side table clearly meant for grief, not confrontation. She closed the door behind us and immediately turned, leaning against it like she needed the support. "You look thin," she said, like she was delivering a compliment. "Grief does that," I replied, voice flat. She twisted the ring on her finger, the same diamond I once wore. I recognized the band instantly. She hadn't even bothered to have it reset. "We just bought a summer place in Cape Cod," she began. 8 bedrooms, private beach. "It's beautiful." "Nathan Brandon," I corrected. She faltered just for a second. "Brandon's company just acquired 2 new startups," she continued. "We're thinking of starting a family." I said nothing, because there was nothing to say. Her smile grew sharper. "Poor you. Still alone at 38. That one cut deeper than it should have, but not for the reason she wanted." I smiled back, slow and deliberate. "Have you met my husband yet?" Her expression flickered uncertainty, breaking through the polished facade. Before she could respond, I opened the door. Carter. He stepped in immediately, calm and composed, the exact opposite of the storm she tried to stir. "Come meet my sister," I said. The moment he entered, another figure appeared in the doorway behind him. Brandon. He must have followed Carter from the hall. His eyes landed on my husband and his face drained of color. "Foster Brandon," said, voice cracking around the name like it physically hurt to say it. Carter's tone stayed even professional. "Brandon, it's been what, 7-8 years? Not since you backed CompuServe and I went with Inotech, right?" Vanessa looked from one man to the other, confusion turning quickly to realization. "Carter Sinclair?" "Foster Investments." "The same," Carter said casually. I slid my hand into his and smiled at them both. "We've been married for 2 years now," I said. Vanessa said nothing. Brandon opened his mouth like he wanted to salvage something, but Carter cut him off with a polite, "You're welcome to reach out to my office if you need to discuss anything further. No venom, no gloating, just power, controlled and absolute." The funeral director appeared, then informing us the service was about to begin. As we returned to the main room, I felt every eye on us, but I didn't shrink from it. For the first time in years, I stood tall beside the man who chose me without lies, without conditions. And for the first time, Vanessa looked small. We took our seats at the front of the chapel just as the music began, soft piano chords that fluttered through the room like breath. I sat between Carter and my father, who hadn't let go of my hand since we walked in. Across the aisle, Vanessa and Brandon sat together, whispering to each other like nothing had happened, like they belonged there, like they hadn't turned our family upside down. My jaw clenched, but I stayed silent. Today was about Mom. She deserved peace, even if her daughters couldn't give it to each other. The minister began the eulogy, speaking of my mother's life in gentle, reverent tones, about her years as a teacher, her passion for books, her way of listening without judgment. Every word landed like a soft ache. I felt Carter squeeze my hand. Then, just as the minister read a quote Mom had once loved, my father let out a sharp gasp beside me. He hunched forward, gripping his chest. "Dad," I said, panic flaring. "Dad, look at me." Carter was already on his feet, calling for help. Someone rushed forward, a doctor in the crowd, thankfully, while murmurs rippled through the room like a wave. Vanessa and Brandon stood too, but didn't come closer. "I'm fine," Dad said weakly, breath labored, but he wasn't. His face had gone pale, his frame trembling under the weight of whatever was happening. We helped him into a side room while the service paused. Carter stayed close, phone in hand, ready to call an ambulance if the situation worsened. The doctor checked his vitals and looked at me. "It might be stress-related," he said. "His heart rate's elevated, but it doesn't look like a full cardiac event. Let him rest for a few minutes and see how he feels." Vanessa appeared in the doorway. Her expression was pinched, not the usual arrogance, but something closer to concern. "Is he okay?" she asked, voice tentative. I didn't answer right away. I wasn't sure if I believed her concern was real or if it was just well-timed remorse. The doctor stood and cleared his throat. "Give him a bit of space. Let's keep the room quiet." We sat in tense silence for 20 minutes. Me, Carter, my father. Vanessa lingered just inside the doorway, silent. Brandon hovered in the hall, pretending not to check his phone every 2 minutes. Eventually, my father sat up straighter. "I'm all right," he said, voice steadier. "Let's finish the service. Your mother wouldn't have wanted a scene." He stood stubborn as ever. Carter offered his arm. I followed close behind. Back in the chapel, people had begun to settle again. The minister offered a gentle apology for the pause, then resumed the ceremony. I stepped up when it was time to speak. My voice shook at first, but I held firm. I talked about Mom's patience, her quiet strength, how she left notes in our lunchboxes even in high school, how she never let a birthday pass without a homemade cake no matter how exhausted she was from work. I didn't mention the rift. I didn't bring up the silence between her daughters. I just honored the woman who held us together far longer than she should have had to. When I stepped down, Vanessa stood. She walked slowly to the podium, eyes glassy. Her paper trembled in her hands. She managed a few lines, then choked. Her voice cracked. She looked down, then out at the room, eyes finding mine. I don't know what made me move, but I did. I rose and walked to her side, placing a hand gently on her back. "It's okay," I whispered. She nodded, swallowed hard, and continued barely. That moment wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't reconciliation, but it was the first time in years we stood side by side, and it was enough, for now. The funeral reception was held at my parents' home. It felt surreal walking through those rooms again, now filled with casseroles and polite conversations, instead of childhood arguments and Sunday dinners. Familiar faces drifted in and out, offering kind words and hugs that felt both genuine and heavy. Vanessa stuck close to Dad, hovering protectively, maybe out of guilt. Brandon lingered in corners, sipping from a tumbler like it was the only thing grounding him. Carter, ever observant, watched them both with quiet detachment. I stayed busy, refilling coffee pots, accepting condolences, making sure Dad stayed hydrated. I didn't speak to Vanessa again that afternoon, but I noticed something I hadn't before. Her makeup was heavier than usual. Her smiles didn't reach her eyes. And every time Brandon disappeared into the hallway with his phone, she stiffened just a little. The cracks were subtle, but I recognized them. I'd worn them once myself. Later in the afternoon, I slipped away to the back garden to breathe. Carter joined me, 2 mugs of tea in hand. "Thought you might need a break," he said, passing one to me. "Thank you." I sipped it slowly. The quiet buzz of conversation inside faded, replaced by birdsong and wind. After a long silence, he said, "Brandon looked like he saw a ghost when he recognized me." I raised an eyebrow. "You never told me you knew each other." He smiled faintly. "We ran in the same circles years ago. Angel investing, pitch events. You know how it is." I nodded. "I heard something about that, something from a colleague once, that you and Brandon backed rival startups." Carter leaned against the porch rail. 7 years ago, he chose CompuServe. I chose Initech. Mine got acquired. His tanked. Wait. I blinked. "You're the reason he went bankrupt." His gaze met mine, calm and unbothered. I didn't plan it, but I didn't stop it either. I stared at him, trying to decide how I felt about that. Then, surprisingly, I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because life really does come full circle sometimes, and this one felt too poetic to ignore. "So let me get this straight," I said, still smiling. "The man who stole my fiancé is married to him now. And my current husband is the man who ended his career." Carter raised his tea. "To cosmic symmetry." We clinked mugs gently. Inside, I saw Vanessa alone near the window, staring at something in the distance. Her expression was blank, almost haunted. Brandon was nowhere in sight. Carter followed my gaze. "They're not doing well," he said. I didn't ask how he knew. I didn't need to. The silence between them spoke volumes. The way he avoided her, the way she overcompensated for both of them. "She bragged about their summer house," I murmured. "Private beach renovations, acquisitions." "Smoke and mirrors," Carter said. "Last I heard, his company's barely keeping afloat." I exhaled, slowly processing that. Once that would have made me feel vindicated. Now, it just made me tired. Vanessa hadn't won anything. Not really. She'd traded a sister for a sinking man in a tailored suit, and all that glitter she'd held onto. It was rusting. "Do you regret it?" Carter asked. Leaving them behind, I shook my head, not for a second. But seeing her now, I watched Vanessa place a hand gently on Dad's arm. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, but in presence, like the confidence she used to wear, like perfume, had worn off. "I don't know if I pity her," I said, "but I definitely don't envy her." Carter nodded. "That's something." I sipped my tea again and looked up at the sky. For the first time all day, I felt something close to peace, not because everything was resolved, but because I no longer needed it to be. Carter flew back to Chicago the morning after the funeral. Board meeting, quarterly review. Life doesn't pause even for grief. I stayed behind. Dad needed help going through Mom's things, bank accounts, insurance paperwork, the cluttered drawers full of handwritten recipes and half-used notebooks. And truthfully, I wasn't ready to leave yet. Not because I wanted to be here, but because I didn't want to carry the weight of everything back to Chicago without understanding it first. On the third afternoon, I found her journal. It was tucked away in her nightstand beneath a pair of reading glasses and a roll of floral-scented hand cream she used every night for as long as I could remember. The journal's leather cover was worn soft at the edges. I recognized her handwriting immediately, neat looping cursive that never changed even when her hands grew tired from chemo. The first entry was dated just after I left for Chicago. October 10th. Charlotte moved out this week. The house feels quieter, not just because she's gone, but because the space between the girls feels heavier than ever. I tried to fix it. God knows I tried. But maybe some things aren't mine to mend. I sat on the edge of the bed, fingers trembling as I turned the pages. Mom had written sparingly, sometimes once a week, sometimes once a month. But every entry mentioned us. Me, Vanessa. The ache between her daughters, her hope that time would bring us back to each other. They were best friends once. I still remember them curled up under the blanket fort in the living room, whispering about boys and homework. What happened to those girls? Where did they go? I swallowed hard. She'd written through the betrayal, through the silence, through every birthday we spent apart, and every holiday that ended with separate phone calls instead of shared dinners. I called Charlotte today. She sounded tired, but okay. I didn't ask about Vanessa. I didn't want to push. But I hope she knows how proud I am of her, even when I don't say it enough. Especially then. Another entry. This one just months before her death. My greatest regret is leaving this world with my girls still estranged. I wish they could see themselves the way I see them, different, yes, but cut from the same cloth. Vanessa with her passion and bravado, Charlotte with her strength and quiet fire. If only they could meet each other now without the shadow of the past in the room. Tears blurred the ink. I closed the journal and held it to my chest. This was her final wish. Not spoken out loud, but written quietly, softly, like everything she ever did for us. And I had failed her. Because despite the eulogy and the shared grief and the moment I placed my hand on Vanessa's back at the podium, I still hated her. Not actively, not loudly, but in the quiet corners of my heart I did. She stole something from me I could never get back. Not just Brandon, but trust, security, a future I'd once been certain of. And she wore my betrayal like a charm bracelet, something shiny, something that got her what she wanted. But now I wasn't so sure. That night, Dad and I ate dinner in silence. Leftover chicken casserole from a neighbor microwaved and bland. Afterward, he turned on the television and dozed in his chair like he always did. I returned to Mom's bedroom. I reread the final page of her journal. It was dated just 2 weeks before she passed. If this is my last entry, let it be this. I don't want them to forgive for my sake. I want them to forgive for theirs. Because forgiveness isn't about letting someone off the hook. It's about putting the pain down before it hardens into something permanent. I hope one day they choose peace over pride. I hope they remember family doesn't have to mean perfect. It just has to mean trying. I didn't know if I could try. Not yet. But I knew I owed her that much. To try. Not for Vanessa, but for the woman who always believed we could find our way back. Even if it took 8 years. Even if it started with just a single step. The doorbell rang just after 6 p.m. Dad had gone to my uncle's for dinner. I was alone in the house, still wearing the oversized cardigan that had belonged to Mom, her scent barely lingering in the threads. When I peeked through the curtain and saw Vanessa standing on the porch alone, I hesitated. Brandon's car wasn't in the driveway. She clutched a small purse in both hands, shoulders slightly hunched like the wind might carry her away if she didn't anchor herself. I opened the door but didn't invite her in. "Hi," she said quietly. Her voice was different than the one from the funeral. Less polished, less armored. "Can I come in?" I studied her for a long moment, then stepped aside. We went into the kitchen. I made coffee out of muscle memory while she sat at the table we'd once shared for after-school snacks and whispered secrets. That table had held so much history: birthday cakes, broken curfews, slammed elbows, and long silences. I placed her mug down, sat across from her, and waited. She didn't meet my eyes. I needed space after the funeral, she started. She paused, catching herself. Brandon and I fought on the way home. I said nothing. I told him I needed to be alone for a few days. He didn't take it well. Still, I waited. She looked up finally, eyes bloodshot. Her makeup was gone, replaced with something raw and human. The sister I remembered wasn't there, not fully, but neither was the woman who had stood beside Brandon at the altar in my place. I saw Mom's journal, she said. My breath caught. Dad showed it to me last night, she continued. Said it was time I read what she really felt. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I copied something. Just one paragraph. This part. She slid it across the table. I recognized Mom's words immediately. Forgiveness isn't about them deserving it. It's about freeing yourself. I hope my girls remember that someday. Vanessa swallowed hard. I've been holding this like a shield, telling myself I'm okay, that I have everything I wanted. But I'm not okay, Charlotte. I stayed quiet. I haven't been okay for a long time, she said, voice cracking. Brandon changed after we got married. Controlling. Cold. Everything he gave me came with strings. The house, the car, the vacations. They were all leveraged, all about appearances. She wrapped her hands around her coffee mug but didn't drink. I can't breathe in that marriage anymore. I'm consulting a lawyer. Quietly. I haven't told him. I looked at her, truly looked, and saw someone who was finally telling the truth. I don't expect forgiveness, she said. I know I don't deserve it, but I needed you to know the truth before everything explodes again. My jaw tightened. Why now? Because Mom's gone, and the only thing she ever asked of me, really asked, was to fix this. And I waited too long. Silence settled between us. Heavy, honest, different from the silence we'd carried for 8 years, the one filled with blame and unspoken resentment. I hated you, I said finally, for years, for taking him, for looking me in the face and lying. But I hated myself more, for not seeing it coming. Vanessa closed her eyes. I hated me too. We didn't hug. We didn't cry together like movie sisters. But something cracked open in that moment. Not healing, but something close. We spent the next hour going through a box of Mom's belongings photos, recipe cards, notes scribbled on the backs of envelopes. We laughed once. It startled us both, but it didn't feel wrong. When she stood to leave, she asked, "Are we okay?" I shook my head. "No, not yet." She nodded, understanding. "But are we trying?" That took longer to answer. Finally, I said, "Maybe." At the door, she turned back. "You seem happy in Chicago." "I am." She managed a soft smile. "I'm glad. One of us should be." When the door closed behind her, I leaned against it and let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. No, we weren't okay. But for the first time in nearly a decade, we weren't pretending. And that somehow was enough to keep going. I returned to Chicago 3 days later. The city welcomed me in the way cities do, with noise and motion and complete indifference. But this time I didn't feel like I was running from something. I felt like I was returning to something I had built with my own hands. Carter picked me up from the airport. He didn't ask many questions, just took my bag, kissed my forehead, and told me we were ordering Thai food that night and not negotiating. I didn't argue. We ate on the couch, curled under a blanket, my head resting on his shoulder. So he said gently, "How was it?" I paused. Harder than I expected, but not in the way I thought it would be. I told him about the journal, about the kitchen conversation with Vanessa, about the moment at the funeral podium. He didn't interrupt, just listened, really listened the way he always did. At the end, I added, "I think she's leaving him." Carter didn't look surprised. She looked hollow. "She was," I said. "She still is." There was a long silence before I spoke again. "I'm pregnant." His head whipped toward me. I smiled. "I found out the morning I left. I took 3 tests. Then I shoved them in a drawer and pretended it could wait." "Charlotte." "I know," I said quickly, holding his hand. I was scared to say it out loud, scared of jinxing it. But now I think, I'm ready. His eyes filled with tears. He didn't say anything for a moment, just wrapped me in his arms. And in that embrace, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. The weeks that followed were quiet, calm, and for once easy. Work picked up. My body changed. Carter became obsessed with spreadsheets about crib safety ratings and prenatal vitamins. I caught him one night watching dad-to-be videos at 2 a.m. like it was his new religion. Vanessa and I kept in touch. Not daily, not even weekly. But we sent each other messages from time to time. Pictures of Mom's recipes we tried. A quote from her journal that resonated. One day, she texted me a photo of her new apartment, a modest one-bedroom in a quiet part of Austin. Fresh start, no more shadows, that was all it said. But it was enough. She'd filed for divorce, quietly, without spectacle. I knew people in their circle were talking, judging her, maybe even enjoying her fall from the pedestal she'd fought to stay on. But she didn't flinch. She just moved forward. There was no dramatic apology to her, no big sibling reunion over wine and tears. But there was effort, and effort meant something. When I hit the second trimester, Carter and I hosted a small dinner for friends. Madison brought tiny baby socks and cried harder than I did during the toast. After dessert, as people began to trickle out, I slipped away to the nursery. We were setting up a soft green room with a rocking chair that Carter had assembled himself. In the quiet, I placed my hand on my growing belly. I thought of my mother, of how she raised 2 daughters the best she could in the middle of chaos and choices and love and failure. I thought about the strength it took for her to write what she did in that journal, not knowing if we'd ever read it, not knowing if it would matter. And I thought of Vanessa, not as the girl who betrayed me, but as the woman who had finally told the truth, the woman who had broken something and was now trying to rebuild something else piece by piece. I didn't know if we'd ever be close again. Maybe that chapter was over, or maybe a new one was beginning quieter, slower, one where we didn't pretend we were fine, but tried honestly to be better. When Carter came in and wrapped his arms around me, I looked at the mural we'd painted together, a vine of soft green leaves climbing the wall. "Do you think I'll be a good mother?" I whispered. He kissed my temple. "I think you already are." And in that moment, I knew the past didn't define me, the betrayal didn't break me, and my future, our child's future, wouldn't be born from bitterness. It would be built from something stronger, something earned, something real. 6 months after Mom's funeral, I stood in the nursery holding our daughter for the first time. She was 7 pounds of soft skin, wrinkled fingers, and a cry that shattered me in the best way. We named her Eleanor Grace, after the woman who gave me strength long before I knew I'd need it. Carter cried harder than I did. At night, while the world slept, and Eleanor rested on my chest, I'd whisper stories to her about love, about loss, about the courage it takes to begin again. I told her about her grandmother who believed in family even when it was fractured, about a sister who broke me, and how I learned to let that pain breathe instead of burying it. Vanessa sent flowers when Eleanor was born. No long message, just, "Welcome to the world, baby Ellie. You have your mother's fire already." V. I didn't reply, but I didn't delete it either. Forgiveness hadn't come in one sweeping moment. It came in fragments in Carter's hand on my back during labor, in Eleanor's tiny fingers curling around mine in the space I no longer gave to anger. I didn't forget, but I no longer needed revenge to feel whole, and maybe that was the greatest victory of all. Spring arrived quietly in Chicago blooms, on the balcony sunlight sneaking through the nursery curtains. One morning, while Eleanor napped and Carter made coffee downstairs, I opened the last box from Austin. Inside were old photo albums, birthday cards, and at the bottom, Mom's journal. I hadn't touched it since the funeral. With careful hands, I flipped through the worn pages until I reached the very last entry. I hadn't noticed it before, dated just days before she passed. To my girls, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. But know this, nothing broken stays broken forever. Not if love is stronger than pride. I hope one day you'll sit in the same room again, not as enemies, not even as sisters, but as women who survived the worst of each other, and still chose to try. That would be enough for me. I traced the words with my fingers. It struck me then not how much I had lost, but how much I'd reclaimed. I had a husband who stood by me without conditions, a daughter whose smile made mornings worth waking up for, and even a sister somewhere in the background who was learning slowly to live without pretending. I closed the journal and placed it gently back in the box. Some wounds don't disappear, but some become reminders that we broke, and still we rebuilt. Looking back, I used to think betrayal would define me, that it would be the sharpest chapter in my life, but it didn't. The truth. It redirected me. I lost my fiancé, my sister, and nearly myself in the process. But I gained something no one could ever take: clarity, strength, a life built not on illusion, but on trust, earned love, and quiet resilience. Forgiveness wasn't a moment. It was a choice I had to make again and again. Some days I failed, but over time the anger grew quiet, and in its place came something softer: peace. Now I sit in the nursery with my daughter in my arms, and I don't think about what I lost. I think about what I survived. I think about what I built. And I realize the woman I became is stronger than the one who was betrayed, stronger because of it. So I ask you, have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted, someone close, maybe even family? If you're walking through that pain, now let me tell you this: you are not broken beyond repair. You are not defined by what they did. You are allowed to rebuild, to feel joy again, to heal in your own time. If this story spoke to you, leave a comment, share your story, or just say "I'm still standing," because that in itself is a victory. And if you haven't yet subscribed for more stories like this, because sometimes the hardest chapters lead to the most beautiful endings.